polite and don't say anything obscene. First thing we're going to look at is, you used to ask a lot of questions about what kind of level of equipment, and you have to know level A, B, C, and D. And if these workers were responding to an emergency incident, if it's SCBA, it's going to be commonly a level A, and that's a requirement. And that's going to be a hazardous material, hazardous emergency response, and you're going to have a specific training for all that. First aid kits, common question they would ask you is how often you got to check them. By the OSHA rules, you got to check them every week to make sure they're good. And a lot of people are thinking everything's monthly, like fire extinguishers, emergency lights, but these would have to be done every week, and make sure that the Band-Aids aren't running out. Or sometimes some workers are hoarders. They take the Band-Aids out and they get like a year's worth of Band-Aids, and you go in to check the cabinet, it's empty. If you have that problem, I would put a camera that would see who's taking it, because then you could see somebody's taking a fistful of it out. In the emergency response issues, if you have corrosive materials like acids and lyes and caustics, you do need to have an eye wash. And construction has it all the time. They have lime and mortar, which automatically is a corrosive. If you got acid cleaners and the data sheet or the label says it's corrosive, you need a portable eye wash probably in a construction. They sell these for about $150. They'll give you 15 minutes of flush. They have to be within 55 feet or 10 seconds. Sometimes you get asked about the ANSI standard on eye washes. And then CPR and first aid. If you're going to do work in rescuing people, you should know CPR and first aid. If you're a trained rescuer in the confined space standard, you have to know this. That requires training every 2 years in AHA, American Heart Association, National Safety Council, or Red Cross. Those are the three that OSHA probably would recognize. If you have an equivalent one, that would be okay. The AED is there to bring a person back to life. It shocks the heart and hopefully can bring a person back. If you don't do CPR on an unconscious, not breathing person, the AHA says 7% of every minute they don't come back. So your emergencies are everything. You got floods, you have fires. Everybody thinks of fires, but it could be a hurricane. We've seen hurricanes wipe out lots of places in the country. Tornadoes. We had a Belvedere tornado where the roof collapsed 3 weeks ago on a Friday, and it injured about 20 people and killed one person. So you have to have a plan. We had a case in Edwardsville with one of the largest retailers in the country that 6 of the workers went into a non-tornado shelter bathroom and they died when the building collapsed. The tornado shelters that were designated in the bathrooms were survivable and nobody got hurt, but you got a lot of employees at these facilities. Not everybody realizes the bathrooms may not be a tornado shelter. They had designated certain ones for tornado shelters, which ones are not. And again, emergency, it says fire is another emergency, and violence is going to be another one. So we'll have a separate section sometime this summer on violence, because that's becoming, 5 questions. One person said they had 8 violence questions, so we'll do that. And toxic gas releases. If you look at this truck, that DOT placard, you don't have to remember the numbers, but you remember that if it's got a fire symbol, it's flammable. There'll be a corrosive one. On the ASP, they may ask you about the placarding, where you're going to have it on the truck. But emergency action plan is a common question you'll get asked about. It just says what you're going to do in an emergency situation, we already talked about. You can do it orally if you have 10 or less employees. That's a common question. So let's go through a knowledge check. Now you can go in the chat and you can hit the 3 little buttons at the bottom, and you can type in your answer. And I'm not going to record it or anything. But what's the primary purpose of emergency drills and exercise? To provide an ergonomic related break from repetitive daily activities. B, to evaluate the overall effectiveness of emergency response procedure and emergency action plan. C, to meet the ISO standards for required number of drills per week. And D, to enhance the employee awareness of the worst case scenario. Okay, so let's put down what you think it is. We're not going to record your answers. We're just going to see the screens. So, and people already picked B. Very good. And that's what you want to be able to go with. It's going to evaluate the overall effectiveness of the emergency response procedures. And that's important. If you're ever stuck in the test, it doesn't work all the time, but sometimes the longest answer is often the correct answer. And this would be an example of one. I always tell people if you're absolutely decided between two answers or three answers, you're not sure, maybe just choose the longest one. Doesn't fail a lot of times. It works probably, I would say, maybe 50% of the time. There's a term called shelter in place. So when the tornado hit in our state here, they went into the shelter in place, was a bathroom. It's an area where you're going to get to that's going to be safe. It's part of your emergency action plan. People have to know about it. They require, by the OSHA rules, everybody to have training in the emergency action plan. So when you hire a person, that's the perfect time to train them. And then practice drills. And we do the drills because you remember how to do things. Plus, some people, they kind of always go in the same way you go out. And in an emergency, that entrance may be blocked. But this plan will be in writing. It talks about what to do in case of fires and other emergencies. And a typical one that I always see is they'll have a building plan. It tells you where you got to go for tornado shelters, where you got to go for exits, and where are the fire alarms and extinguishers. The elements of the program, you're going to have people shut down equipment. If you're in a factory, you're going to have to shut down boilers and other equipment. You're going to have to designate those people and those titles in your emergency action plan. You got to count who's in the building. Most of the companies I deal with have a sign-in log for contractors and visitors. Heaven forbid that you get a fire that's very big at your facility and you don't know who's in your plant, because that's the first thing the fire response people are going to ask, who's in the plant? And you just said, I don't know. We didn't keep a count. We didn't have a log. That's not good. And one company, and if I go back to the Wayback Machine in 1989, they had 700 people in the facility, contractors, visitors, and everything. When the fire happened, the fire was well over 50 meters or about 150 feet high, a huge fire. And most of the people got out. They counted 698. They couldn't find two people. Those two people jumped over a fence, ran to a park, instead of going to the designated fire location, which was across the street. And the fire department people were looking for those two people, and they're risking their lives. And when they finally said, well, maybe we ought to go check in, they were getting chewed out by a lot of people because people are risking their lives to see if they're out there. And you talk about how it's going to be reported. Most people have alarms, intercoms, anything you have to do. People have to know what it is. What I see at a lot of places is that you might have multiple alarms. One might be for a tornado alarm, one might be for a fire. So you got to train people in these types of alarms. Any kind of hazardous material release. I'm dealing right now with a facility that's got sulfuric acid. If that gets out, 250 gallons, it's going to be an issue. So by the industry codes, you got to have it diked or a double wall tank, and you got to do maintenance procedures on it. But if for heaven forbid that pipe breaks, and now you got sulfuric acid spraying in that room, you got to have this kind of gear on. You're going to have full acid gear on, because you can sit there and be burned with that sulfuric acid because it's high concentrations, a pH of 1, very corrosive. You're going to have a safety shower in that room. So if you were to stop the leak, they're going to decontaminate you and try to get all that acid off that suit so that you don't get burned by just taking off your own clothing. So I see a lot of it. Ammonia, chlorine, acids are common ones you might have to do in emergency response. You're going to be doing what they call HAZWOPER. You're going to have at least 40 hours of initial training, and then if you're a specialist, 24 hours of training, and then an annual renewal for 8 hours. What methods should an employer employ to assess the effectiveness of an emergency response plan? Regularly conducted disaster training, conduct drills or exercise, organize the fire drills with focus on speed and offer rewards for the winning employees, review the historical company data on disaster-related fatalities and injuries. What do you think? Okay, these are getting tougher. You know, every October they get the group of people together. They write the questions. They go over the questions that have had a high miss percentage. And I'm thinking the questions, you know, even though the blueprint hasn't changed since 2018, the questions are getting more tough. They want you to do drills and exercise. And this is a tough one because regular disaster training could be in a classroom. That's nothing like doing a drill. I have watched people do drills, sometimes 10 minutes to get a person out of an office building, you know, that's on a first floor. And you're thinking, what's going on? Well, people are running back to get their computer, their keys, their purse, their wallet. That's not good. You have to get them in the idea. I always try to make sure the people know that we're going to do a drill. It's going to be on a nice day, not like extreme hot or extreme cold, because who wants to be out in, you know, weather of 50 degrees centigrade or 120 degrees or, you know, minus 10 degrees, you know, below zero. I mean, that's no good. So, but that's the best way to do it. You do an actual practice. It is not required by OSHA. The industry requires it. Industry talks about doing it. The type of incidents, you could have planned events. You know, you're going to do a control burn and a wildfire. You can go in there and deal with other issues like oil spills, which are unplanned events. These are going to be issues. Here they're trying to sit there and control the spill of an oil in an area with a river. And this is taking absorbent material, trying to stop the flow. It takes a lot of work. These incident plans, when you're like a pipeline company like Enbridge, you're going to have these things planned out. Who are you going to call to go in and put this in? You just can't say, well, we got the spill, let's go look on the internet. You got to have people already in place that can be in there a short time, get out there, and be able to stop this. Now, oil contains benzene, which is a carcinogen, so that's why the workers are going to wear, typically, if the water area is contaminated with oil, kind of a oil-resistant plastic. And of course, we've seen terrorist events. We've seen other issues. Chernobyl was an accident of, you know, a horrible accident in the Ukraine with, you know, the nuclear plant. We've had Fukushima in Japan. These are a little bit exceptional. Those nuclear facilities have fairly good in-depth plans. You're going to get questions, at least 3 on the incident command system. And this is a tough thing if you've never gone through it. You can take a course called ICS 100, which I think, you know, FEMA offers free of charge to learn a little bit about it. But let's just take a look at what you got to know a little bit. It's a standard response. I mean, I remember dealing with the early 90s. When we get to an incident such as a chemical plant explosion, people were arguing who was in charge. And they would actually, you know, almost get, you know, in a point where I'm going to arrest you if you're not going to let me take charge of it. And that's nonsense. So the whole idea is that it's a standardized system. FEMA is the ultimate authority, at least in the United States, where you're going to have a fairly clear organizational structure. Local emergency responders will be trained in this system, including, like when I used to work for OSHA, we got trained in it. Everybody has to know how to fill out their roles. And they're going to ask you about the 7 roles. You know, the first one is going to be, the scene is going to be led by an incident commander. So when we had an oil spill, it was going to be, the incident commander picked was going to be EPA. I was a safety officer with another person in OSHA, as the other one from Michigan, OSHA. We were the safety people. We report right to the incident commander. The public information officer is the one that deals with the media, and the only one. Even though I know a lot about safety, we don't need to have 5, 10 people talking to the media, giving everybody different stories. The public information officer in the oil spill would say, okay, I'm going to do a briefing at 6 in the morning, 10 o'clock in the morning, 2 o'clock in the afternoon, 6 o'clock at night. And these positions would rotate. There would be maybe 3 different public information officers. They know what's happening because they're working right with the incident commander. A lot of people don't know what the liaison officer, but in these big spills, we're going to have EPA, we're going to have other agencies get involved. FEMA will be involved. The local environmental people of a state or a territory are going to be involved. These are people that are going to liaison with them. And then there's 4 sections, and you got to know these 4 sections. It's not uncommon to give you 3 of them and throw another one in, and you have to figure out which one is wrong. Or they'll give you 3 of them that are bad and which one is correct. And you got to know what they do also. Now, operations, they're going to respond to the emergency. Planning is dealing with the tactics and the group of what we need to do. They're going to interact with everybody else that's on this tree. Logistics is the people that deal with where we're going to put the equipment, like cranes. What do we need to get in as far as spacing to put our materials, put our areas in? Do we need to bring in trailers and everything else? And finance is always dealing with who's going to pay for it and making sure people are accounted for and that we got the right people out there as far as, hotels and everything else. Like in the one in Michigan, they took over a elementary school because it was not operating in the summer, and that became the headquarters. And then they booked up all the hotels within 30 miles to sit there and bring in all the responders, because we're talking 1,000 plus people coming in to put this oil spill and clean it up, and they need to stay somewhere. So you got to know this chart. And you should be able to fill this chart out without looking at it. The incident command means we'll go out of here. So these are photos from incident commands. When I did a tornado where it wiped out all the power in a large city, the governor of my state was the incident commander. And we were in a huge area with all these people. You notice they have signs, liaison officer. It's nice because otherwise you're not going to know who does what. And sometimes you might have a room for operations, a room for planning. The different officers are going to go in there. You got to remember, it may be 3 people in safety. When I did the Springfield tornado, I was a safety officer with 7 other safety professionals. And we're talking about, we got power lines down, we got issues of traffic control, and we want to make sure the public and workers are not going to be killed. So the 5 major functions, they're going to ask you what they are, and they call them by sections or functions. And these are the 4 different departments. And again, we talked about you got to know what each one does. And then span and control. This is a term that's used a lot in business and military. It's how many people you can effectively supervise. 5 to 7 is really a good number. You're not going to be too effective supervising 100 people. There's no way. You're not going to know what everybody does. The commander is the ultimate responsibility. And you notice people are wearing vests a lot of times because people want to know what it is, and there might be 3 incident commanders. They may work 24/7, and they will have 3, 4 different incident commanders. So you got to know who's on charge when you get in there. They are overall responsible. That's the people they're going to ask. Who's responsible? I'm the incident commander. I'm responsible. They will have extensive training on this issue. They won't just take a simple class on incident command systems. They will probably have taken weeks of training on this. And again, they're going to be in the United States. It's going to be by departments. States or the FEMA would be picking the person, and they'll say, okay, this is the incident commander. This group or this agency is going to run it, and we'll be involved with the liaison officer. And then again, you can provide other issues. If you have environmental, they may be part of your safety officer, but they're not going to be a designated 3 officers reporting this commander. Knowledge check, such as a hazardous material spill, who holds the ultimate responsibility? Okay, I'll get that question, Mr. Nguyen, in a second. Okay, very good. Incident commander is going to be it. Who has planning responsibility? They will sit there and say, okay, here's where we're at. We got the oil leak. The operation people are stopping the flow in the river. What do we need? We need to get vacuum trucks out there. So they'll tell the operation people, we're going to work with logistics and get some vacuum trucks. We hired 10 vacuum truck contractors. We got to suck up this oil. That's the things the planning people are doing. The operations are actually doing it. Planning are kind of like a pseudo management team that's out there looking at what we're doing and say, what do we need to do in the future? What do we got to do tomorrow? What do we have to bring in next day? Public information, again, you have to know these responsibilities and roles. They're going to tell the issue with the press. They're going to talk about what the media is asking. Again, a lot of times this commander's busy. They're not going to be able to talk to the media. The media, once they understand you got a good public information officer, they're going to deal with that person. And that person is going to give them what they want to see, because they got to report to the community. Everybody has this huge desire for information in a big emergency. So they're the primary contact, and they're going to work with all these sections to get the information. And they usually are very good. Your safety officer, we had a building collapse You would think, well, we wouldn't implement maybe an incident command. It might be something where the city might run this. And they're going to ask you, if you have a construction background, what are some safety issues we have to do? Should we evacuate the other buildings? Well, we're going to have to sit there and look at this air conditioning unit that could weigh 8,000 pounds. Can this collapse? We got to get the next door building because the building has structural damage. We need to get them evacuated out. We need to get a demo contractor to probably bring a excavator with a grabbing attachment and pull this building down while nobody is in there, just in case there's some structural issues with the other buildings next to it. The for sale building, not so bad, but if you're the owner of that building, you're concerned. But these are things that they're going to talk about, and you're expected to help get the answers. You're not have to know everything. If you don't know the answers, you need to get other people to help, and that's what's nice about it. When I'm working with OSHA, I got all of OSHA, which is 2,000 people. We got the state OSHAs, the EPA, other people we can bring in involved on the incident and talk to them. Liaison, again, they're going to work with the other agencies, because remember, we're going to have a lot of agencies. Sometimes FEMA in the jacket with the yellow lettering, they may, a lot of people think they take over, but sometimes they don't. They just let other agencies run it. They're going to coordinate. They have the ability to cut through things. Sometimes you're going to say, hey, we need to book up 40 hotels. Can you guys pay for it? Because, the money just doesn't come out of anywhere. You have to be able to sit there and work with the finance department, and part of that liaison officer is saying, hey, we do need some money. We got to bring in a lot of trailers, a lot of cleanup equipment, and that's one of the things that they're going to work with the different agencies. They're kind of like behind the scenes. They're not out there talking to the press. That's the public information officer. So what officer does not report to the incident commander? That's a little bit of a different question. What do you think? Now, if you've just seen this for the first time, it's going to be tough, but that's why you practice this. Okay, very good. Environmental officer. There's no such title as an environmental officer. It's public information, liaison, and safety. So this is like I said, they'll give you 3 that are right and you have to throw out the one that's bad, or they'll give you 3 that are wrong and you have to pick the one that's correct. And again, general staff, these 4 sections, you're always going to get a question on it probably. They hear about continuity of operation plans. This is COOP. This is COVID. This is things we practiced when I was with OSHA. What if the main area we work in is not available? Could be the building is destroyed, collapsed, whatever. Can we run the facility or our operations in a remote place? We found out we could do that in COVID. You can have, with technology, you have access to the internet anywhere, anytime. You get to those remote areas. People could work from home. Except you can't work from home if you're in a manufacturing and construction. But you have to have ability to say, our headquarters is down. The building has problems. We can't run. Can we run the operation? This is important because you don't want to find this out that we had a tornado or a hurricane or anything else and we can't run our company. And every day you can't run your company is thousands or millions of dollars. So you have to have a plan to go through it. Okay, this is a question that's common on the test. What refers to the number of subordinates under the manager's direct control? Command structure, organizational chart, span of control, or key performance indicators? A little bit tougher question, I can see. Okay, it's span and control. It's the number of people you can effectively manage, as they call it. So, any questions? Okay, thank you very much.